Okay, everyone, welcome to the November 21st special council meeting. Meeting is called to order. First on the agenda is the bills for approval.
I so move.
Any discussion or anybody want to pull anything on it? Okay, we got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next is the 2020 levy and budget update. Mr. Linus, you want to take over?
Thank you, Dave. So before we get started on this, I'd like to clear up some things on some questions I've got over the past week or so. And so let's do that first. Then we'll go through the changes we made to the budget from our last meeting and back in September. We'll talk a little bit about tax rates, and I'd like to focus most of our attention on the capital projects because that'll lead us into where I'd like to spend most of our time would be on item 4, okay, which is local option sales tax. So some of the questions I get are what's included in the budget, what's not included in the budget, and were the things that are requested, whether it's the chamber, the fireworks, the Cross Lakers, Blade Act, or the Initiative Foundation, are my budget requests included in this budget? The answer to that is yes. Just to bring everybody back up to speed, the chamber supported at $2,500, right, Cindy? We've got a $15,000 placeholder in there for the fireworks. The Initiative Foundation, same as last year at $1,650. And back in September, when the Cross Lakers showed up, their request was for $7,000 for banners and flowers and things like that. I don't have that one listed separately. We'll just need to reallocate that within general government. But we did account for it. Now, new for this year is Blade Act, Brainerd Lakes Area Development Corporation. They're looking for a 3-year agreement to support them for their long-range planning. This year, for 2020, they're asking for their fee be raised to $10,000. That's included in their budget in the EDA's budget. So what they're looking for is a 3-year agreement with a slight increase each year, going into 2021 and 2022. That's accounted for in this budget too, okay? And we talked about that back in August, I think. The other thing that's on everybody's mind, I got a question on what happened to the money the city had set aside for purchasing the land by the Public Works facility, whether it be used for securing the facility. It's that 4 or 5 acre plot on the edge. So to help everybody understand that, I'm going to drag up some history. And if you remember, about this time last year when we did our budget, what we did is we said, well, we're not going to use levy money to pay for that, but if it comes up and it's available for sale, then we're just going to pay cash for it, okay? So what I'm going to show you is our budget that we're in this year. And I'm going to point to this placeholder, council-directed funds towards capital. We added 100, we recognized in our budget last year that we were going to use our own funds to pay for that. So we've got that covered. But then the next question is, where was that reflected in the budget, and where did those funds ultimately end up going? So if you remember, when we did the 2019 budget, and this is really small, and we'll really test your vision when we get into sales tax. We put it in here as a capital item. There we go. The $120,000 in the 2019 budget. And then we put it in on the front page as we're not going to levy for it, we're going to use our own funds to pay for it. Then, now let's fast forward to last spring, when we started talking about more in depth on capital planning and what should we do. So at that time, in that April, May, June, July timeframe, council direction was we need to figure out some funding for this building we're building that's currently under construction. One way to do that was to come up with a capital plan. We started talking real lightly at the same time about how to fund all this stuff. But one of the things we all agreed on as a council was we need to take and look out into the future and try to figure out what the horizon looks like and try to do some longer term planning. So staff was tasked with going through that process and figuring out, let's project our fire trucks out as far as we can. Let's project our roads out as far as we can. Let's project every sewer project or expense out as far as we can. So what we did is we ended up doing that, and that had the impact of changing the timing of some of those projects. So what we did in the budget we'll go over in a few minutes is we reallocated some of those items within the same dollar ranges, knowing that we still need to stay within the same range of dollars. We agreed to do different road projects that were in the budget, and we agreed to do them for different amounts. So what we did is we had the impact of shifting those dollars, including the $120,000, to try to balance that out, because we knew we were going to spend that money somewhere or not. And so when we get into that, I'll show you what we did, because we did the same thing this year, is we took another look at those projects since September, and we said, okay, let's make sure we're still on target, and if we're assuming we're paying for these items with levy dollars or bond proceeds, let's reflect that so that we're not levying 2 years for the same project and doing it in year 2. So what we did is we took those projects, whether it was a truck or the pickleball courts or storm sewer pond or whatever that was, or the city hall project, we put those dollars on the expense side in the budget showing we're going to spend this money, but then we reflected it on our summary page that we've already got the cash to pay for that. And when we start looking at that, you'll see some pretty big numbers on there. You'll see numbers like $3.4 million, and you go, wow, that's a big number. Where did that come from? Well, remember, we just got a drawdown schedule from the contractor for the city hall, fire hall project, and about $2 million of that project will fall into 2020. We already have the cash for that, so we took the project cost and the cash and reflected that in 2020. We did the same thing with the fire department cost. We recently got going on that to say, okay, let's start thinking about that. The idea was to pay for that with cash, so we've added $1.4 million on the expense side of the budget and then offset it with cash on the front page. So the short story is the funds got reallocated when we did our capital plan to try to figure out where these things were going to fall. We did the same thing with a few pieces of equipment at the Public Works facility. I know we moved the floor drains and some of those types of improvements into 2020, okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
I get it. So the 120, was that, I was the culprit that asked. Is
Yeah.
that same thing, because we have levied for it?
We levied for it in previous years.
Right, so you've done the same thing with that?
Yep.
Okay, all right. And
Yeah.
this is something a little different that you've started this year?
No,
No, same as last?
same as last.
Oh.
We tried to reflect that. You know, if you remember a couple years ago when we did Anchor Point Road, we had a number of projects that we didn't do for timing purposes. And so I came back to the council and said, look, you've got some accumulated funds here. The reason the fund balance is growing is because we had a number of projects we didn't follow through on, or they were delayed. So you've got enough money to pay cash for that project. And so we did that. We paid cash for it. Now, the next year came by and we said, we did most of the projects that we planned. We got to Manhattan Point Boulevard, and we didn't have those excess funds to pay for it. Now, the project costs were lower than we had anticipated, so what we did in effect, used the money that we levied for the city share of that project and used it to reduce the bond issue. So that's what we did, right, wrong, or indifferent. We did not go back and amend our budget, but we did reallocate the projects within those amounts, is what we did, okay? Any questions on that?
No, thank you.
Okay. So most of the questions I get on the budget are, I like everything, I think it's great, but I don't like it if it impacts me. So let's talk about that for a minute. One of you had asked me to go through some of the changes on here. And this is laid out pretty much the same as I've always done that for you, is I've just listed some assumptions. Really, none of the assumptions have changed. We've just updated information since our last meeting. And what I always try to do when you look at pages 2 through 5 is I like to show where did we start and what things did we change to get to where we are at today as far as revenue and as far as expense. So if you go back and look at your previous packets, you'll see those things line up, with one exception, is when I presented the packet for the September meeting, we had a 7% adjustment in the budget, but we approved a 9% adjustment. This information reflects a 9%, not a 7.
Mike, at page 2, you had adjusting for the recycling program, like 26,000. I was thinking it was maybe less than that, or is that just how it ended up coming out?
That's on the revenue side. That's the amount of money that the county passed through to us.
Originally, okay.
That was the number they gave us, that where they said your allocation for next year is this number.
Got it.
And so then if you see on page 4, down towards the bottom, we actually spend about $35,480 on that program because they don't fully fund it. The city has picked up the difference. So I took both of those out.
Thank you.
The other big item in there is right up on page 4 where you see the adjust for the estimated cost of the fire hall project, $1,004,000. We put that on the expense side, and then we showed on our summary page that we already have the cash to pay for that.
Thank you.
Sitting in the bank, okay?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So what's the deal with the cemetery? Is this all surveying costs? I
We-
guess, is it necessary right now? I don't know the history, so.
Well, there's a couple ways to look at that. In kind of a morbid way, we had a really good year in the cemetery. We sold a lot of plots. A lot of people were interned, more so than in a normal year, I would say, Shar. And so what we were looking at in our long-range planning is we have the annex, or the new part of the cemetery. At some point, we're going to need to plot that out. And because we're going to run out of places to put people eventually for places that are already plotted. So when, and some of you have seen this, I know Dave, you've seen the cemetery deeds. When somebody buys a plot, you know, there's an actual deed that goes with it and a physical location that's recorded where that person is interned. And so what that was a placeholder to do the next section. We had it in 2020, thinking, well, if we can have time to get it done, we just pushed it out another year. So we took it out and said, we're going to spend about $5,000 on stuff, whether it's irrigation or repairs or whatever on the cemetery. So that's what that was. Okay. The other thing we can note on here is on that same page, about in the middle, same page 4, I sat down with Eric and we projected out the cost of the squads because we had, you know, new information on it. So we took $15,000 out of the capital outlay for the squad cars for 2020. And then we used the revised costs to project that out on our 6-year replacement plan. So the idea was we'd replace one car every year, then every 6th year we'd replace 2. So we're on that cycle, on a 5-year life on the squad cars, is what we did. So we lowered that projection.
So Mike, I got to ask you a question on that particularly. When we have a piece of equipment that we're replacing, then we sell the old one.
That's correct.
And where does that go, or how do we know what we get for it, or?
We hide it and bury it and don't tell anyone. No, we don't. No, we don't. What we do is we use that to offset the cost of the equipment we put in the new car. What we do is we go out onto a website called GovDeals, I believe, and we list that for public auction, and we sell them.
Do we get any kind of report of what we get for that stuff? Any
Yes,
kind
we
of
do.
equipment?
Yes, we do.
Do we get it here though, or is there just one in the file someplace?
We have a record in the file, and the proceeds of that sale are reflected in the month that we sell it. In fact, I don't have it with me, but it shows, proceeds of proceeds of
I
sales
would
of
just be
fixed
curious
assets.
what that stuff is, if
Yeah,
sometime,
Yep.
point that out to me.
yeah, we sold a fire truck. Squad cars, we don't usually get too much for them. By the time we get done with them, they're pretty much well-used. We try to get what we can for them. Public works trucks, I know, we've got a fire truck for sale right now that Chip is trying to sell to offset the costs of the new truck for the stuff he puts in it. So that's in process, but yeah, we'd happy to show it to you anytime.
Yeah, okay.
What kind of ballpark numbers do you get for a fire truck? I mean, it depends on the truck, I know, but 2,000, 10,000?
We're looking at about between $16,000 and $20,000 for the one we have
Thanks.
to dispose of right now. Squad cars, we sold a grass rig for about $7,700. It was like a 2002 Ford F-250, I think it was, or 350. The black one that was around here. Sold a squad car here about a month ago. I don't recall what that one was. It was $1,900. And we were happy to see it go. So,
Thank you.
yep.
And now we got two more for sale, right? Or when we replace those two, there'll be two more coming up.
I'm sorry?
There'll be two more squads coming up for sale on the replacements that you're doing?
We will probably sell the Taurus, and there's been discussion regarding planning and zoning and having a vehicle and maybe them taking, so I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna sell them both. Planning and zoning has not made that request yet, and they're fine with what they're doing on it. So that's new information to you. So yes, you'll have two. We used to have a planning and zoning vehicle, which was a retired squad car, and it just didn't work out. It was a better solution for us to pay mileage. They don't drive that much anyways. There was really no reason to have that and maintain it and all that stuff, so we got rid of it. Okay? So let's go to page 6, and I promise we're not going to go through this page by page. So this is really the number. I'm going to just go to the right-hand corner and talk about tax rates. This is really the number that impacts us the most. And when I talk about tax rates, what we look at is what's our levy, whatever that number is, and divide that by the taxable market value, whatever that number is, and that gives us our tax rate. The tax rate is the factor that gets applied towards the taxable tax capacity of your home or business property, which is based on the assessed valuation. So if the tax rate goes up and the valuation stays the same, you pay a little bit more on the same valued property. If the tax rate goes up, so if it went from like 30%, 30.15%, which is 30.2%, to 30.2%, or 30.5% rounded, that's 0.3% adjustment. So it essentially stayed the same as it did last year, okay?
And that's at a 9% increase.
That's at a 9% adjustment in levy dollars request over last year. That's good news. So we can point with a high level of confidence that If somebody's paying significantly more tax than they paid last year, it's because their valuation went up, not because of the levy.
I think the county has increased the valuations for some lakefront properties in the preliminary stuff they sent out last January.
That's correct. And what the county does is they pick a section of the city, and every 5 years, they reassess or readjust an area. And so what planning and zoning and the city clerk does is, let's say where your home is at, John, the county just went through and did their assessment, and then next summer, somebody builds a big house. We share that information with the county right away, so they get that new property on the assessment rolls right away, instead of waiting 5 years for them to come back around and hopefully catch any new construction. So a lot of it comes from new construction. In this case, there's about $16.5 million of new construction that are reflected in these numbers. That's not going to happen every year. Some years it's half that, or less than half.
I'm just thinking that people are going to see, for some people, their tax costs go up for next year.
Yep.
But a lot of that is due to the increased valuation from the county, which they have to do for state regs, not so much what Cross Lake is doing.
That's correct. Our levy stayed our tax rate essentially stayed the same for all practical purposes. So usually I bring you a bunch of information that shows if my house is worth this is the adjustment reflected in this year's estimate. I didn't do that this year because they're so close. Okay?
So we set that at 9% this year on a preliminary level. Last year, I think it was 7%, correct?
That's correct.
And we can still go back to 7%, and what would that do to the numbers if we did that?
You know, I just happen to have that.
All right.
Before we talk about that, I just want to show you my logic for getting there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this year's. And this is on page 10, if you're following along. So what I do is I look at, we'll just look at the general fund, because the other funds are specific. I said we're going to spend $8.6 million in the general fund, including capital outlay. A lion's share of it is the new city hall and fire hall. We're planning on generating $5.3 million of funds. Now remember, some of those dollars are going to be generated from grants or debt or new bonds or whatever to fill in the gap. So what I always try to do is I try to make this number down on the bottom to come out to zero, because I want to know how much money we need to, how much money we're short, or how much money we need to come up with to get down to zero. So in this case, we're generating, a negative number means we're generating about $112,000 of additional funds that we haven't identified spending somewhere, okay? That gets us to our tax rate down here of 30.46%. So then I go back and I look at it, because I know I'm going to get the question, if everything was perfect, which it isn't, and I could get that number to come out to zero, what would that look like? And from 2 points of view, what would our tax rate be, and what would our overall levy be, okay? And when I do that, I can get us down to 6.15% over last year, at a 29.67% tax rate.
Which is less than 2019.
That would be less than 2019. That'd be almost 1% less. That doesn't give you any room here at all.
And you
Okay.
feel we need that room, we need that flexibility? I mean, and maybe this is premature to talk about this now, but.
No,
at
no,
some
that's a good
point-
question. I mean, I think everyone likes to have some wiggle room, some flexibility for things that change. This does not reflect that room by doing it like this.
But on worst case, if you actually needed $100,000, we have a place to get it.
Yep.
We can just dig into the how many million that are sitting.
When we've
Some.
essentially got most of the proceeds left. We've spent $1.5 million of them on the sewer project.
Right. So that, I'm just saying, if we needed, we have some savings that we can dip into if we needed.
Yeah.
For the sake of keeping this levy number down.
So you're saying instead of going at 9, go back to 6 or 7?
Well, but I kind of think I'd like to see it come the other way rather than come down.
Yeah.
If
If we have a bad winter or something goes wrong at the shop or whatever, you can eat up $100,000 awfully fast.
I also think there's a good chance the economy next year may not be as good as this year. I mean, you don't have to go back to 6, you could go back to 7 or 8 or something
Right.
if you wanted to keep it where the Cross Lake rate doesn't go up. You could still do something that wasn't 9.
But if we leave it at 9 and the economy goes down, that elevated tax is still there. We never lower, we've never gone negative on levies, so. The economy goes down, we're still collecting.
Yeah.
At
The only
9% a higher, number
Yeah.
than we would, so.
Yeah, the other way to look at that is, if you go back in your history, going back to the middle 2000s, there were times where you did go down slightly, but then you had a pretty steep curve to catch up when you had to go up. The whole idea in trying to stabilize a levy is to have some kind of moderate growth to account for increased costs in whatever area you're looking at. And then what you try to do is not put yourself in the position where you're relying on increase in market value to make up any differences, because you can get yourself into trouble doing that, because at some point you lose the ability to shift debt service levies that you might otherwise have to levy to other places, and that's what the city had done. When a bond issuer was paid, that levy was shifted to balance the general fund. So the revenues grew in the general fund, the expense just moved from whatever debt service fund back to the general fund to account for those costs.
My view is that the 9%, it's still relatively painless compliments of all the new construction that's happening.
That's a fair statement. Then you can also point to, and let me refer you to this. This is on page 9. This is more of a historical look at levies and tax rates. What this doesn't show is what the city spent its money on, because we all know we've had some pretty significant projects over the last few years that are driving some of this. But if you look at pay 2020 over there on the far right, you go down to the bottom right-hand corner, I'm just trying to take my best guess at where the new levy dollars are coming from, if it's coming from changes in taxable tax capacity versus changes in tax levy. So in this model, about $42,461 is coming from changes in levy, and $313,000 is coming from changes in market value. So now individually, if your property goes up in value, you're going to pay more tax, even at the same rate.
Mike, on page 6, you said the population was 2230. That's not number of properties getting taxed, right? That's the number of people?
Those are the number of homesteaded.
Okay, so that means it would be around $200 per property tax increase to get the 42,000.
No.
I'm doing that right.
No, the population figure reported there would be, and I'm looking at this one, this is on page 6.
Right.
The 2230. That's the population the county's estimating is homestead residential population. So if two people are living in the same house, that's one property. It doesn't account for seasonal recreational property,
Got it.
okay?
Okay, so it's actually spread over more properties than 2230.
I think there's, what, about 4,500 properties?
Got it. Okay,
something like
because of the
that.
seasonal, et cetera. Thank you,
Yeah.
that helps.
You're doubling that, so you're cutting it in half.
Right, thank you.
Yeah,
It's still an increase, but it's just less
It is.
per property.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the more expensive property will pay the higher rate, for the less expensive pays the lower.
Got it. Thank you.
any other questions on tax rates? Okay. What you find is it all becomes relative, and the only time I really get any questions on the budget or the tax rate from the public is when they get their statement of proposed taxes, and they look at it and say, well, it's not a bill. And then when they get their tax statement is when I usually get the phone calls, because my name's on the tax statement. But for some reason, they call me instead of the school and the county, because they've got the same issue on that. The next couple pages, 7 and 8 on there, is some information on how we stack up with our neighbors. You know, you can draw your own conclusions on that. The city still is fairly low, on the low end as compared to everybody else. We're over on the right-hand side here for the combined rate. When I look at the combined rate, I'm looking at city, county, watershed district, sewer district, housing, school district. So you're wondering why, Mike, you just told me my rate was 30%, and now you're telling me it's 76. Well, you gotta remember, there's other taxing jurisdictions that tax us too, okay? So that's how you compare to your neighbors on the proposed rates. If you want to look specifically at a little bit closer, you know, that's shown on page 8. And we're just looking at individual rates. You see Baxter's at 56%, Brainerd has a general rate of close to 80, Breezy Point 46, Crosby 113, Ironton 114, Manhattan Beach 21, Nisswa's at 32, and we're at 30, a little over 30. That's how we stack up with our neighbors. Any questions on that? Okay, so the other things that are baked into this budget are all the changes that we made since our last meeting, which we talked about a little bit up front. The rest of these pages are some, you know, when you look at pages 11 through 16 is some high-level summary information on revenue expenses by year. And when you look at those, the primary thing that changes on the expense side is what we spent our capital money on. Now, you can see that the total expenditures go up in the years we had bigger projects, and they stay pretty much flat or even, with slight increases, and some instances, lower costs on the operating side. So there's some information on that. So there are no changes, to that format. So if we can move to the capital plan for next year, that starts on page 17 of this. And when you look at these, you know, we've already talked a little bit about the how we handled the $120,000 from last year. And what I did on this budget, when you look at the 2019 budget, the totals are the same as what the council approved a year ago. But what we did is we allocated some of those items within each department based on the capital plan we came up with last summer and started talking about in August and September. I think the first time we talked about it was at our August meeting. So that's what we did, and I'm just going to point you out to page 17 on here. There's your $3.4 million. 2 million of which is bond proceeds that we haven't spent yet, then $1.4 million of the city's share of the overall total project. And then you remember, when we went back up to, we wanted to show that we were not levying again for those funds, because we already have them. We're showing that as a cash contribution up here on page 10 to balance out our budget, okay? The other question I had on capital that I mentioned I'd get back to when we started that discussion earlier was we had some projects on the budget for 2019 that we didn't get done in 2019, so we need to move them to 2020 and reflect that we did that. So when you look at page 21, I'd mentioned floor drains and the security system at the Public Works. We just moved those to the next year, because we're not going to get those done this year. It's getting too late to fix floor drains. We were looking at replacing a truck and a utility box. What we found was they ran out of vehicles on the state contract. We waited too long to buy that for a 2019 item, so it's going to need to fall into 2020. The other things we did is on page 23. I think everyone's familiar with the Perkins Road project. That's what this one is. We've spent about $83,000 to date on that, but we put a placeholder in the budget for $255,000 for the city's share of that project. That much of it, $170,000 or a little more, is going to fall into next year. So we pushed that into next year. These are changes we made on new information that we got since September. This is the county, this is the storm drainage pond on 66. If that's better or not. Our share was about 70,000, our local share is about 70,000. We ran into some easement property acquisition issues. There were a couple properties along that corridor that were for sale that we had to go through the taking process to obtain legal access to do soil borings and complete design of that pond. We have the land. We're just waiting for the final cost from the court on it. So we pushed our local share into next year. Okay? So when I add all those up, all those pushes into next year, and there were some other small ones on there. If I go back to page 10, they're included in this item right here, the 425. There's about $346,000 of stuff, whether it's floor drains or equipment or whatever it was. And then the $172,000 for Perkins Road, and then the balance of the storm drainage ponds that are currently we're looking at.
Did we have any money budgeted for the 66 sewer project for 2019?
We did, in our original budget. And I don't think all of you have this. We had budgeted we didn't know the timing of it, so we put $1,100,000 in there in our budget for last year. It's right here.
So is that carrying over also? So that's not part of this year's levy?
We didn't levy for it. The assumption was we'd issue bonds for it.
Okay.
So it was a wash And when I say a wash, it means we were planning to issue, we had a placeholder for new debt on it, and then the same amount for the expense side. So it netted to zero, because there was no levy for it.
So how about that property down by Public Works too? Did we have any set aside for that property?
We put a place, not in 2020, that is,
Not in 2019, we did not have anything set
in
aside.
2019, we set it aside, and we talked about that at the start of the meeting, and how we reallocated some of those funds to move them around to make it fit our new plan that we did last
There's a
summer.
list of carryover stuff that,
Yeah, and when we did that one, the idea was, well, if it comes up for sale and we can agree on a price, then we'll just dip into our reserves to pay for it. Right now, I don't think that's in the near term for next year, so I took it out, based on our last discussion on that.
okay.
Okay?
Mike, I have one question. I don't know, it's kind of a tough question to ask, but Wildwind Ranch Drive, you have your carryover, is that one? It wasn't done, or are you bonding for that, or that's page 23.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll affect the numbers. Is that one of the, we levied the money but didn't spend it, is it going into 2020? Down a few
Yep, I
lines.
see it. That's a good, you're on 23, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything with that one. What do you think, Ted? The question was on, what did we do with Wild Wind Ranch Drive? We had it in the budget, but we did not do the project, so should we move that to 2020 and reflect?
Yes,
that? Okay, well, we can make that adjustment.
Will it affect any of the numbers? No, because you're going to
No.
offset it.
It won't affect anything, and that's why we have these discussions, because I can't catch everything. So we'll move that to 2020, and we'll just add it to the cash share, because the other thing on that is we hadn't really determined what our assessment policy is. We're kind of struggling with that right now. So some of this will be assessed, so it's not going to be a one-to-one conversion, Dave. The idea was if we did that project last year, we'd reduce the amount of the levy for it to make the funds balance on the bottom. It's not a big project, so we can just plug it in there. And I'm sure there's others that we could make that argument on too. But that's the bulk of it. And when you look at where are we spending our money, we have the normal stuff every year. But where we really have the big dollars are in the capital projects. What other questions do you have on this model? Does it make sense to you? Does it not make sense? Or do you want to see changes? There's a lot of detail here.
Nice presentation, thank you.
Yep, and you ended up, at least from the last time we talked, you went down in costs on your operating, which is good.
We did.
You trimmed, I don't know, where's the number? There's so many numbers here, but you're down from what we thought back in September, so.
Yeah, and I tend to guess high on the expense side and low on the revenue side, because I know at some point I'm going to get updated information, whether it's September or November. And when I get a new piece of information, I plug it in here and see what it does. Sometimes it doesn't do anything. Sometimes it goes the right way, sometimes it doesn't.
Can we talk about the levy just for a little bit before we move on?
Sure.
The 9% compared to 7%.
Yep.
9% would give us a $120,000 slush fund, I believe.
It'd give you,
112.
it'd give you an opportunity to absorb changes. How's that?
So I guess, do we want to build that into it, or do we want to fall back on cash if we have something like that?
I think at the moment with the fire department being built and we don't have final cost, because it's not, this hasn't been redone yet, I think that 100 needs to, I would prefer it stayed.
I personally think you should leave it at 9, because there's a lot of projects going on, and I'm sure there's going to be some overruns. And I just think that's the way it is.
I'm with Gary.
I'd go with that too, only because in the big scheme of things, the economy's been fairly good this year. I'm not sure it's going to stay that way, and relatively painless with the 9 this year because of the build. Once again, lakefront properties are getting assessed higher compliments of the county, so people will feel that. But I think it's incredible there's been enough building that you can keep a rate at .03 up, or .3 up.
Yeah.
My 2 cents worth is that we all understand the property value increase, and we feel good about it, but it's the residents that are going to look at the paper and they're going to see 9%, and they don't know all of the facts that we know and how it's calculated. And
Well, they look at their total bill. If their total bill's $1,000, they look at it as being 9% of that, when in fact it's
Right.
9%
And so
of
Mike will
300
get all the
or
calls
something.
and do that. And just back to my earlier comment, we have some, if you need some money, we have some money. We have money. We're fortunate to have that phone company money. If
That's the
we
way
need-
I feel about it
We
too.
need
But
some
but
money.
I think we're spending that phone company money really fast right now. In 2020 is gonna, ton of it's gonna go away.
Yeah, about $1.4 million of it. So another way to look at this is if you were interested in a reduction and you said, okay, I don't like 7, I don't like 6, you could still live with 8%, and that would take about $40,000 off your levy. One strategy would be say, yep, we started at 9, we sharpened the pencil, and now we're down to 8, and that's where we're gonna live. It's really up to you.
My feeling about that is that, if we use the phone company money, for example, that's the people's money that we're holding in an account. And if we did have a runover, we could use that as a reserve fund. And if we don't do it and we increase the levy, we're just gonna automatically charge them and they're gonna contribute. And
The levy's there for years.
Yeah. You don't have to make that decision today, because our
Okay.
final, our
Right.
public,
Yeah. We've already set the 9 as a ceiling.
yeah.
The other aspect, if we go with a surplus of 113, from all of my working career, people know there's money left to be spent. They somehow will justify spending it, and it's gone.
So when do we
Well-
set that, Mike? Is that at the December 9th?
You do the final certification on December 9th. Now, let me caution you, we're getting close to start to talk about sales tax. You're going to see some pretty big funding gaps when we start talking about sales tax. That might change your position on 9 versus 6 or 7 or whatever.
Okay.
Okay?
What percentage do we get on the bonds for the new city hall? Interest rate?
Our effective or net effective interest rate was about 1.92 or whatever. It was really low.
We got that interest rate because we had money sitting in the bank. Without money in the bank, that interest rate would have been up.
Yeah.
And that'll affect every bond we go for.
Yeah, we did really well on that.
Yeah.
We worked hard to get that.
Timing was good, having cash in the bank gives you a lot more discussion ability with people, and they feel a lot more comfortable about you being able to pay.
So there's a lot of stuff in here. I basically went over the big items that changed since our last 2 meetings. So when you have questions, just come and talk about it. We'll figure it out. Anything that doesn't make sense or whatever, just, you know where to find me. Just sit down and we can hammer it out and figure it out.
Before the 9th, though.
Before the 9th.
We're going to need a final number to bring
Yeah.
forward.
So if the consensus is still at 9, I'll bring 9% forth. If there's any other changes between now and the 9th, we need to know that really quick.
So we need to know that today, though, it sound like. If people want to go with 8 rather than 9 or whatever, I'm thinking, let's not kick the can down the road. Let's do it so we can go to the meeting on
Well,
the
should we get
9th.
through the sales tax conversation first? Isn't that what you just kind of said?
Yeah,
Yeah.
All right,
let's start talking about that a
I can
little
live
bit.
with
So
that.
we're going to move on to, we can come back to this.
So on the local option sales tax, the idea here was to try to find a funding source for the projects we're looking at. And so the sales tax committees had several meetings on that topic. And what happens is we have more projects than we have funding for, okay? And what we're finding, when we did this capital plan, that's in the shortened version that's included in your budget, we listed everything that we could possibly see out into the future, whether it was a fire truck, a squad car, a piece of public works equipment, a sewer plant rebuild. And we tried to fit that in and kind of guess what year it would fall in, and then try to total that up. So in the big giant, there's really no good way to do this other than to lay it out so you can have the whole thing. So I'm going to go right to the back page of this. And I'm just going to look at some of these totals on here.
14, right?
Yeah. And so if we go out, and when I say 10 years, I'm starting in 2021, because that would be the first year that we would have sales tax available to fund any projects, should it be approved by the state and through referendum. When I total up all the stuff that's in the capital plan between 2021 and 2037, there's $31,493,000 in there. When I add another 5 years and go out 15 years, 2021 to 2020, and then move to 2021 to 2035, it jumps up about $3.5 million. So if I look down at the bottom here, if I look at those totals, if we had a sales tax at 0.5%, and we put a modest inflationary factor in there, and we stretch that out to those same periods, you could potentially generate $2.5 million in local option sales tax at 0.5%, or $4.2 million at 0.5%. In both cases, when we look at public works projects or sewer projects or any of them, the sewer projects are the next big number where my big finger's covering up, is about $13 million. So then we get into that discussion. Well, if it's 0.5%, well, maybe 1% is better, or up to 1%. And that's really up to the council. But in either case, if it's 0.5% or 1%, it's still not enough money to fully fund it. Okay? So let's just understand that. The challenge in doing this is coming to agreement on what projects you want to fund, knowing that it won't cover all of them. So if you really think about that, what that means, if you're going to sign up for trying to get relief on the sewer, then you're also, in effect, committing to doing those projects and issuing the appropriate bonds and assessing the appropriate amounts to pay for them. Okay? So that's where I kind of want to have the discussion on. The recommendation from our last sales tax committee meeting was the committee's recommendation was to implement a local option sales tax at 0.5% for up to 25 years for the wastewater collection and treatment facilities to support those budgeted expenditures going out into the future. So what we need to do is to get some kind of consensus from the council on what projects you want in that resolution, get a resolution passed at the December meeting, so we have something to share with our legislators to start building support to get this through the legislature. Now, we're on a really compressed timetable. We haven't had a lot of public input on it. We haven't had listening sessions. We just haven't had time to do that between, the October, November timeframe. We can still do that, but to get this in order for consideration by the legislature for us to have a referendum a year from now, we need to have our plan in place, in January, and support at the legislative level developed for it. One way to do it is to tie it into the comprehensive plan. We have to show the regional benefit of, clean water. That's easy to do. So we can get it done. We just need to understand which ones you want to include in there.
I think the sewer project over 10, 15 years, clearly expensive. My opinion is in terms of the lakes and keeping the lake quality and keeping this a place where people want to live, work, and come to vacation, that's a big benefit. Generally, populations don't want to pay for sewer plants. You don't see it, it's underground. Much more interested in paying for fire, police, and roads. So I think that would be a useful thing to put towards it, but I think that does put us on a pathway saying over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to work on continuing the sewer lines, plural, whatever. But in talking to people, I'm hearing more and more that we're going to eventually need more sewer to keep the septics that don't work and any additional businesses, et cetera, that come to town available so they can do their things.
The committee did agree, though, that the sewer-related items were the one to
Yep.
pursue and not really list anything else. And that
Yeah.
was because the sewer alone would eat up,
100% of it.
yeah, there just isn't enough money to even cover that, so. So I think probably the next steps are that we have to look at the citywide sewer study that Bolton and Mink put together. I'm surmising here, with Ted and other people, and try to decide, project 1, project 2, and get them in the plan. Maybe some of those won't be done, which would, we don't have enough money to cover $13 million. But I think we have to go through that with Ted's recommendations. The only other thing I can say relative to the capital plan that I'm looking at now, and I know this is just getting us to start talking about it, is it's hot and heavy with a sewer project every year through 2029, and I just don't think we have the horsepower to deal with one every, I think we need a gap in there.
But I think where we're at now, and you've got the one back here where people are asking for it,
Right.
and then maybe down 16 that needs to be looked at.
So I would recommend that we have a meeting
But
on
the thing I think
sewer.
everybody needs to be careful of is we can use this to offset our bonding costs and so forth. Cannot use it to offset any connection fees. Cannot be used for connection fees, because that benefits a specific
Particular
individual
property or person.
versus the whole group, the whole community, the lake, so forth.
You think that
Yeah.
we
So,
need to talk
we do.
very soon?
Like yesterday.
Okay.
So before we get into that real deep, this was actually the wastewater management study that was issued about a little over a year ago now. We had a draft in early October. This does represent the final report. I believe all of you have seen this. So when you look at that report, the project costs are identified in big round numbers. And these all are probably light, is what we're finding. But you've got East Shore Service Area, the Wildwood Service Area, the Daggett Lake Community Center area, and then the Moonlight Service area, and then there's some estimated amounts in there. When you total those up, it's about $14 million, and this does not include Ted's estimate of about $7 million for a plant refurbish in a few years. Okay? The report also talks about which areas would be first and second and third. Their recommendation was, and I'm just looking right out of the report, it was based on the greatest need with the greatest impact. And that's on page 23 of the report, if anyone wants to dig that up and look at it. But it talks about, our recommended priority list is below, provided a brief explanation regarding, for the top of the 3 priorities. So you got the north system, which is from City Hall to the intersection of 16 and 66. Easterly, Daggett Lake service area, that's Norway, Kimball, Brook Street. The East Shore service area, called the South System. Southeasterly system, which is Wildwood. That's that area kind of behind, across the highway from Reed's, back in there. And then the community system, service center area, you know, up that way, going down Daggett Pine Road, that way. That was the engineer's recommendation on which ones we should do in which order.
So if we decided that we wanted to use the sales tax for sewer exclusively, but let's say we come to 2025 or something, or 2028, and that particular year, we don't want to do sewer, I mean, it's not a problem with delaying things, right? Because we don't have enough money to pay for it out of the sales tax, and all this stuff is going to have to be levied or bonded at some time.
That's my
So
understanding.
you could delay things if you had to
Yep.
and ran into a problem, or you decided for whatever reason, we don't want to do that this year.
Yeah, you can adjust your plan, but you have to be fairly rigid with it, because when we do the resolution in December on this, you know, we can't change it at the election. We have to be specific, and it's quite specific what we need to put in there. Here's the project, here's the estimated cost, here's when we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to fund it. Over this, here's how much property tax we're going to generate, here's the impact on, or sales tax, here's the impact on a typical household, and all the way down that. Now, I know when Brainerd rebuilt their plant, that was about a $35 million project. You know, they didn't have a choice to not rebuild it. I mean, they had to do something, so they used the local option sales tax to pay for it. But it didn't quite pay for all of it, so they still have a charge against the users to pay for the system. They didn't generate enough cash to pay for their project, is the point. And in talking with their staff, what they would have liked to do was to allocate some of that money for other projects, because they always had the ability to charge more for their sewer service. You know, we don't, you know, we can debate that. We don't have that option, really, because the way our service fees are set up for the sewer is we barely cover operations. Typically, you have a replacement component and a debt service component in your rate structure. We have neither of those in ours.
We could put them in if we wanted to.
You sure could. It'd be high.
Got it.
But right now, our debt service levy is more than the revenue we generate from the operations. And that's been like that for a long time.
Well, in some ways, the sewer benefits the entire
Yep.
Cross Lake area. In fact, it probably benefits people who don't even live in Cross Lake by helping to keep the lakes clean and nice for them to come visit and work.
And that is the argument for doing it the way it was done.
So Mike, you don't have anything in here for any kind of trails or anything in the city?
No.
I mean, there's nothing in here for that.
Typically, you know, when we do trails, we have to do the trails ourselves. We have to pay for them.
So that wouldn't be a regional benefit that we could,
Do you want to talk about what WSN's at the meeting, the sidewalks and stuff, the grant that they're trying to get
Sure.
for the federal government?
Okay. So what we're doing, you know, I think everyone's aware of the pedestrian walkability parking study. You know, we basically studied that area from between the two bridges to try to evaluate, do we have a parking issue, and if so, what is it? what times of the day, where are the available parking spaces, how do people move between different areas along that corridor. That is real close to being final on that. In fact, I've got a meeting set up with Dave Reese and the county. Tim Bray had requested a meeting on that to talk about that study and how we could use that as the basis for applying for grant funding to build additional sidewalks, to move people safely between areas. You know, and the primary area was how do you get people from the middle of the city, meaning Town Square, to across 66 and across 3 to the park or what'll be the future Loon Center. You know, and it talked about things like, you know, designating certain areas for sidewalks, connecting a sidewalk from the core property to basically the new assisted living facility. That was one of the ideas. And so it's phased into into 2 phases. And we're right in the middle of getting the paperwork filled out to apply for the application for the TAP. It's called a TAP grant. Shar and I had a meeting with Tad Erickson at Region 5, answered a bunch of questions. And so we're right in the middle of the process of filling out the application. The nice thing about it is Region 5 does the review work and the selection for which grants would be up for being awarded and which ones were not sufficient. Another thing that helps us with that is Tim Bray used to sit on the committee at Region 5, the county engineer, that made those selections. And he's real integrally involved in this one because it's a joint county-city project, trying to get the money to help with some of those costs. So right in the middle of that, that would help. That's not reflected in here, in the capital plan.
So is the general gist of that is there could be outside federal money to help with the trails? Is that what that means?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
You know, and the federal government is real interested in making sure once you build that sidewalk or trail or connector for a bike or a pedestrian, that it be in place for at least 20 years. Because if you decide in 10 years to rip it up and do something else, you could have problems. Number one is they wouldn't fund it, because they expect their assets to last longer than that in that example.
And I think it was mentioned the plan for the Loon Center is probably helping us with the need to get this funding.
Yeah,
The need for more people, you know, to handle more people in town.
one of the strategies was saying, hey, you approved this facility at your location, and you've created some unintended consequences that we have to deal with now. You should help us pay for it. Okay?
Yep, okay, I got another question here. The Public Works and the sewer makes up about $27 million of the $34 million projected budget.
Yep.
And without getting too deep into it, why is that so high? I don't know, I mean,
Well, I can't speak to why it's so high. About $15 million of the improvements are listed in here, and there's a good explanation in that study. And, you know, Ted can speak to the cost of the plant. His best guess at a plant rebuild was $7 million.
what is driving the need for that in 2029, Ted? Is there something coming up that you know about that we're gonna have to do, or?
Realize when we design a plant, it's designed for 20 years. That's the life expectancy of a plant, is 20 years. So if you just start putting it out there, that was about the time we're going to be sitting at that next big grade of the plant.
And so this last upgrade we didn't update the whole plant?
No, you still have the old clarifiers, the old filters, the ultraviolet, all that is still there. At some time, you have to upgrade that also.
Okay, it's a big number there.
And it's going to get more expensive. And you got to realize you got biosolids in there, that was never addressed, so all of those are bits and pieces of it, so.
Maybe talk about how we're going to treat those in the future.
Been working with the engineers as far as biosolids. Right now, we haul the biosolids that we produce over to Pine River and they go into their reed beds, and then they are land applied. We're looking at a method that we can take and save them, or treat them in-house, and rather than they go to Pequot Lake, or to Pine River, and we pay them to dispose of them, we would take and we would go to the landfill and be used as cover in the landfill. So the engineers and myself are working on some different methods, a little more economical. We wouldn't be dependent on another city or another agency. We'd be in our control of our own fate. So I apologize, my voice is going. So
So is that a cost savings thing or a convenience thing, or?
it'll save us money in the long run.
Okay. That just seems like a lot of money in that proposed budget for,
Basically, sewers do two things. They help the lake, they help the ground water, they improve the property owner's valuation, and it's a cost to the city. And the more sewer you have, the more cost it is. Because the sewer doesn't make money. But it's needed for the lakes and the groundwater and so on.
Kind of like a car.
Yeah, you drive it off the
Forever
lot,
expense.
it's not worth anything.
You know,
It's-
I've worked for 4 communities, and always, it seems that Public Works is always the highest budget, overall budget. We're always a third to a half of a budget of a city. It's just the nature of the beast.
And one thing, it's still in Cross Lake, most of our wells are working where we can use the water that comes out of them without treatment for either E. coli or chemicals or whatever. Be nice to keep it that way as long as we can,
And that's what the sewers will do, or the sewer extension will do.
because I don't put chlorine in my water to drink it. I can just drink it out of the ground, which is an unusual thing for a lot of places in the U.S.
so going out 10 years on this budget, you got $32 million. And that's all projects, that's not, administration, police, fire,
That's everything.
that's everything.
Yeah. So when I look at, this is on page 12. If I look at just sewer, if I go out 10 years, maybe 2021, it's 13 million versus 13.2, going a little further. So we need to bake in whatever we decide to do, we could either take this plan, the Bolton Mink plan, and bake those 3 projects. They're well-defined in there. The costs are reasonably estimated. The amount from sewer access charges are identified. We have an assessment policy. We could get an estimate of cost potentially of what we would assess the homeowner for the pipe. And the difference would be sales tax and general levy. Now, one thing we need to be aware of, I did talk on Tuesday when I was talking with Tim Bray. He talked a little bit about how do we ensure that the county would participate in this project on 66. And because we've talked a lot about in previous meetings that our timetable is different than the county's. Their need in their plan is 2024. Our need or perceived project timing is this year, 2020 or 2021. Now, if the sales tax proposal that we're talking about is approved by the state legislature and it passes a referendum, the first we would see any money would be 2021, the second half of 2021 for it. So there's a time lag there, and we'd have to make up the
So
difference.
if we were to do a sewer project in 2020, could we use the 2021 money to pay it back? Could
If we
go-
designate it as such, yes.
We couldn't do that.
We'd have to write it in our plan. But what Tim Bray cautioned me to do is saying, once your governing body decides what they want to do, you need to let them know. We need to formally write a resolution or a letter requesting them to earmark those funds. Because when they've done their 5-year capital plan, what they're doing is they're committing to do those projects in that time frame. And if there's projects that don't fit that time frame, or there are projects in that time frame that aren't in the same year that we want to do them, they need to know that so they can set those monies aside. So when they collect the funds between when we do the project and when they have it in their plan, they'll be available to us. And they'll bring that to their county board and earmark them as such.
So what are we trying to accomplish today, just with the sales tax here? Are we going to try to agree on a percentage and where it's going to go?
I think you want to agree on a percentage and a project and a time frame. And then I can work with our bond counsel and bond advisor to get the details hammered out for
And
a
your
resolution.
recommendation would be to go out 20 years or 25 years on what we do?
That's what the committee has said, yeah.
You have the notes of the meeting?
I do. I have the notes. of our
I
last
didn't
meeting.
bring the,
That's okay, I think Mike said you have,
I do. There was a couple edits we talked about being made. Now, in talking with Tim Bray, his recommendation was to start out small, pick a couple projects, get them done, show how beneficial it was to do that, and then if you need to go back and do it again, go ahead and do it. Now, when you talk with the state of Minnesota, the Department of Revenue, they said on bigger projects, they're seeing up to 30 years on some of this stuff. They're planning that far out on heavy projects. He also suggested that I'm talking about the representative from the Department of Revenue that said, if you're not sure if you want to go 0.5% or 3/4 or 1%, put in your resolution, we'd like authorization for up to 1%, your maximum. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but it means you wouldn't have to go back for approval to go from 0.5 to 1 or 3/4 to 1 if you chose to do that in the future.
And the sales tax committee came back with a recommendation of 0.5%.
Yeah, we did, yes. And the reason for that was twofold. Our surrounding, there's two other cities in Crow Wing County that have sales tax, it's Brainerd and Baxter, and they're both at 0.5%. The committee felt, correct me if I'm wrong, that we would be kind of an outlier if we were twice what our other regional shopping centers
Does
were.
Walker have a sales tax?
Walker does.
Yeah.
There's 1.5%.
1.5% in Walker.
That's
Is
correct.
that true?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
This has to go to a taxpayer referendum in the fall of 2020, yes?
Yes, what we need, the way the process would work is we would come back with the resolution for those identified projects. The council would pass the resolution. We'd provide the supporting documentation to the chair of each appropriate committee in the House and the Senate. We'd enlist the support of our legislators, and being mayor, we'd have to have the mayor. I mean, politicians like to talk to the lead politician in each entity. So we would do that. We'd have a series of meetings and explain to them why we think this is a good deal. We'd want to tie it into our comprehensive plan. We'd want to show how there's a regional benefit for doing this and how people outside the region would benefit from our sales tax. We could incorporate our sales tax report that we got from the University of Minnesota, which said, hey, 80% of your retail sales are coming from not properties that are homesteaded.
My only concern was saying up to 1%. I think we might turn off some voters who might be for a 1.5%, but wouldn't be for an up to 1% sales tax. I don't know how that.
How did it go in
How it
Walker
fits.
when they did it at a 1.5%? Did you guys talk about that or go up and talk to them?
we
What was
did
the
when we
question?
were up there.
How did it go through in Walker to get
They
1.5%?
put it in, they went over, there was a 5-year process to get that approved.
Okay.
And they, whatever reason, they put it in at 1.5%, expecting to get 0.5%, and it went through.
And it went through the voter referendum?
And it survived the voter referendum, but remember, they have no, their community is very small. I didn't realize how restricted the community was on size. And it's basically a bedroom community. That's how I understood it.
You coming from Cross Lake says the Walker is an extremely small community? What's the population of Walker?
1,500, I wanted to say.
They just have no tax base. They don't have the homes.
Yeah.
We do, Lake Homes.
Well, they have no, their biggest business is Reed Sporting Goods. It's the only real business they
They got
have.
a couple boat dealers or whatever, but
Yeah.
They're out of the city.
The boat dealers are?
Yeah, the boat dealers are outside the city limits.
They're out of the city.
So
Oh, they
so let's-
are?
both of them, really?
Let's talk about that for a second, because one of the questions that came up was, we've got, a number of significant boat dealers in town, and can we put a limit on what we charge them? Same goes for lumberyards. The answer I'm finding is no. The exemption for the cap relates to the state law that says motor vehicle, on-road motor vehicle with wheels, like a bus, a car, a pickup truck. What I'm finding is a boat doesn't meet that definition for exclusion. That's the opinion of our bond advisor and our bond counsel on that. I posed that question to the Department of Revenue. They haven't given me a definitive answer, but they said they didn't disagree with it. So the question is, you've got boat dealers and lumberyards that don't have a cap on the sales tax. But if you're an auto dealer, it's $20.
Has anybody else found any kind of creative way to work around that? We probably don't know.
No, generally, you have to be at least as strict as the governing body above you, but you generally can't be less.
Okay,
So-
well, my,
So that's an issue.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, the committee we just didn't want to have the voters say, up to 1% is,
When this goes on the referendum, could we have 3 columns? Could we have a vote for the sales tax, either no, we don't want it, 0.5%, or 1%? Could they check boxes? Is that possible?
We could look into that. I mean, generally, no. You probably want to pick what you want to do. Now, each project would be listed as a separate project, and each project is voted on separately. So the key here is to identify the projects we want to do, not more than 5, or you can pick 4 projects. You can't pick 10. But when you pick a project, you can say, I want to do this area of roads, then you list them out, and if somebody doesn't want that road, none of those roads get done. Or you pick a project, like saying, I want to do sewer going up to the intersection up there, and everyone says, yep, we want to do that. It passes. But you have to get it through the state legislature first, and then it goes to the referendum.
So you've got to actually specifically name each sewer project you want to do, or do you want to apply it to the sewer projects in the town?
It's better to identify the projects, because if you identify the projects in that fashion, then you risk not having them done. If they don't like one project in your plan that you're calling a project. So what we need to do is a local resolution before application for authority. Before the governing body of a political subdivision requests legislative approval to impose a local sales tax authorized by special tax law, it should adopt a resolution indicating its approval of the tax. The resolution must include the following information: the tax rate, a detailed description of not more than 5 projects to be funded, documentation of the regional significance of each project, including the share of economic benefit or use of each project by persons residing or businesses located outside of the jurisdiction. So we need to show the benefit of people coming in, how they'd benefit from our sales tax. The amount of tax that would be used for each project and the estimated time needed to raise that amount of revenue. The total that will be raised for all projects before the tax expired and the length of time The tax will be in effect if all proposed projects are funded, and so forth. So we need to be real specific in our resolution. That's the point. We can't just say, well, we're going to use it for stuff and then hope it passes.
So did the tax committee lay all that out? Did you guys agree on that?
We did not agree on the projects. We wanted to discuss that at this level.
We got it in the sewer bucket, so,
Yeah.
and that's it, because we figured you can't say, well, some roads go with the sewer projects, but you can't jump into another one because we felt there probably wasn't enough money to just cover the sewer, which there isn't. So we said sewer, and the argument is support the visitors, to keep the lakes clean, keep, all of
Yeah,
that.
I agree.
And that stuff is in the comprehensive plan.
But so we got to decide if it's the 66 to 16 sewer project or the,
I think so. We have to kind of provide some help to Ted and Mike and Shar on which ones are we going to do and when.
So my question is, we would not see any of that money till 2022, right?
20.
The earliest we would see
2021,
money
we'll
would be
start seeing money.
2021.
You'd start collecting it then, but when do they pay it? At the end of the year? They can't, they have to pay it off taxes or
Every
something?
month. Every
It
month.
probably,
At the end of 2021?
No, we get, because we would start collecting it in 2021.
we'd see the first receipt of revenue.
Every month you get a
Earliest.
check.
Oh,
Two.
Yeah,
at a
that's what
time.
my question was.
Yeah.
The earliest I'm seeing would be like April, May timeframe.
Because we're looking at spending money that we don't know if we're ever going to have.
Yeah. You know, and that's why, that goes back to my comment
can't-
earlier.
And we can't base our levies and so on money that you don't have.
That's the dilemma.
Well, it's kind of important to get the mayor and Dave to talk to the legislative people.
I understand that, but
Well, I would encourage us to do up to 1%, and it doesn't sound like you guys want to do that, you want to stay at a half, but
Well, we're concerned that it would, what it will do to the voters.
true, and I'm concerned that we're not going to generate enough money to
Because remember, if the
fulfill
costs
our
start
objective,
escalating
you
and
know.
changing too much on us, you can go back 4 or 5 years into the program and you can get it raised. Other cities, communities have done that. I don't want to do that, I don't want to see that, but
Well, that's just my feeling about it, and it's just because of the dollars and trying to pay projects off, but, you know, if it's 0.5%, it is.
You know, the other strategy I've heard that works is start out small, identify a couple of them, and get them done. You know, because, I mean, to go out and bite off 12 or 13 or $15 million or whatever it is, you know, I don't have the plant rebuild. So if we just look at the sewer, we've got about $14 million of identified projects that are well identified, and we have a $7 million rebuild of the plant. So you could say, I don't want to use this plan, capital plan. I want to use the engineer's estimate because it's well-defined and it's timed out well.
Well, yeah, in 2029, you could go back if we have to spend $7 or $8 million on a plant.
Or you do part of it. You don't have to do all of it, you
Yeah,
know.
right.
But it does commit you to making up the gap, whether it's through bonds or levy.
Right, and the impact of financially, is that something you can just whip up on Excel and tell us? You know,
I could
'cause
give you,
that could be a big number.
well, let's just look at that for a second. So let's say you've got $15 million of projects, and you say, okay, I'm going to assess a third of it. So now you're down to 10 million. I'm going to generate maybe a third of it in sales tax. Now you're down to 5 million, your commitment's $5 million.
And then the city would pick up the other third of it. Through
Yep.
taxes. I mean, right? That's the only,
Yeah.
5,
We'd pick up 5.
a third of it, which would
Right.
be 5, yeah.
And the issues if we did a couple of projects at 5 million, start small, is you might never get the others done, or you got to go back to the legislature again, or you got to go to the voters again, or yes, yes, and yes?
Correct.
Okay.
The problem is in any way you slice it, it's really difficult to say that you'll generate enough sales tax to pay for the projects.
Well, I don't
'Cause
think
the math
anybody
doesn't work
ever
out.
was looking at that in its entirety. We're just trying to subsidize it.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, you're gonna have to have
I agree.
some form of assessment
Yeah.
and tax, or a change in user fees, or all of the above.
So where do we go? Do we agree to disagree and go 0.5% on the thing, and we're gonna dedicate it to the sewer, and that's as far as we can go today?
Well, 16th, we'll have to finalize whatever we do. What we agree upon today is where he's going to
Correction,
go with
he's gonna go,
proclamation
yeah.
or whatever. Because the 16th, is that the next council meeting?
It's a ninth.
9th, I'm
Ninth.
sorry, thank you. That's when we'll vote, and we need to move forward on that day.
I mean, the committee was what, we could vote on what the committee said
Yeah.
on
You
that,
could,
that letter you had up.
yeah, you could accept the committee's recommendation, would be one way to do it. I guess what you could do as a governing body is you could accept the committee's recommendation and then identify the plans you want, the projects you want to address.
And who is gonna be meeting with the legislature? I mean, is that true? We're gonna have to do that?
You are, that's correct. We're going to have to go down
And
to
what
see.
if through conversation with whoever that may be, old Big Mouth here opens up his mouth and they make a recommendation that a 1% might be a smart thing to do? Is that possible or no?
Not after we pass a
This is it,
resolution.
so just, that's
You
all.
have, you're just, that's your personal opinion,
Yeah, I know,
not
yeah,
the opinion of
absolutely.
5 here, so you have to be real careful.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
clarifying right now.
Yeah.
You're debating how far you're going to go out. One of your controlling factors, how far you can go with expanding your system, is the size of the plant today. You could take and look at a project and say, okay, that's going to generate, or the engineers could say they're going to generate this much waste. The plant can handle that. So look at those as, and before you look at and then say, okay, we got to do biosolids in there, and then we got to do an expansion. Maybe that's
That's a good idea.
that's a
Ted.
20-year or 15-year or whatever the length of this
Yeah.
0.5% or 1% is, but that's an option I just
Right,
thought of.
but we need your help with that. And
Yes.
Phil's, so we have, and Mike's under a tight deadline to get this all done by
But I would,
January 1.
I would keep the plant off of this and keep it to the sewer system. Because when the plant comes in, that's what, 7 million?
Well, there's $1 million that's in biosolids that's in there.
Okay?
There's a $7.5 million that's out there in 2029. But there's little pieces that are gonna come in between you're gonna have to do to keep treating and keep.
So we're saying cover it
We-
up
we
to the
could- we could put the
2029.
little piece, but when you get to that 7.5, then you look at increasing the sales tax, or whoever sits in these seats looks at it at that time.
Okay, so are you
Not
looking for a
today.
motion to move this forward, or just a recommendation?
I'm looking for a motion to accept the committee's recommendation,
Okay,
and then we'll have another motion to identify the specific projects, right?
okay, so does somebody want to make that motion?
I make that motion.
Andrews makes a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Hecox, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Okay, thank you.
Now we
I
have
have-
to have a meeting in a short order to
To-
go over the report and
To go over the report and determine the
the
plans.
detail.
Yep.
Okay. And then there's been some corrections to the minutes that he showed, and
Yeah.
I've got those corrections done. I'll send it out to everybody.
Yeah, there were, go ahead.
I got a question on something else, and I didn't see anything for the road down to Little Pine. I might have missed it, but is
Oh.
that in the budget at all?
I believe it is.
Norway Trail?
No, I don't know. The road goes down to Little Pine that they're going to tear up with the rock dam. I don't know what the name of the road is.
Big Pine.
Big Pine, yeah.
No, I think our obligation was the road, wasn't it, to rebuild it in
But I didn't see it.
21?
Let me confirm that it's in there,
Yeah.
because it's possible.
You and I talked about it, Mike, but I don't know if it got in there.
Yeah, it was $584,000. It should be. It's on page 23. $584,800.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There it
I
is.
missed it.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, now another motion to put it on the sewer project?
Well, we accepted the recommendation. What we need to do is sit down and make sure these projects are the ones we want to do.
Okay, I thought you said you
Yeah.
needed two motions, no?
Well, this would be the second one,
This would be the second one.
so.
Do you want to go forth with the recommendations in this plan? That's the question.
That's the Bolton Mink plan, right, from last year.
Yeah.
I would say we'd want to review it in detail and then
Yeah,
decide.
we'd want to use it as a
Yeah.
guideline, but
Yep.
finalize how we want to use
So
it.
you,
Right.
you need to make a motion to set another meeting.
I'll make that motion to set another meeting to review the Bolton and
Can we
Mink
pick a
plan,
date? Because we're on a
time frame. Monday, Tuesday?
Yeah.
Okay, Tuesday.
That's the
Next
20.
week or when?
Yeah, 26th.
I'll be deer hunting.
You have a phone?
I'm going to
and a deer
Wisconsin.
stand?
I'm out of town on the 26th. I can
25th?
call in, but I'm not here.
How about 25th?
I'm out of town.
25th is a Monday.
It's next Monday. I'm out of
I,
town.
I actually have no phone reception where I'm at, so.
How about tomorrow?
no.
Too short. Need 3 days.
Oh, okay. That's right.
So the week after,
Then we're into,
second, third,
Second won't work, I work.
We've got a Perkins Road on the 2nd, correct?
yeah, and Public Works.
Could we make a decision today? You've already had the Bolton Mink thing.
right?
Could you just make a decision? I mean, we've had a year to look at it. They've got an order laid out.
And then make the recommendation based on it being submitted with the December 9th council meeting for discussion and final approval. Does that make sense?
Will that get us far enough, or do you need a approval today?
I think it'll get us close. We still need some input from the engineer and Ted, though, to make sure everyone's on the same page. I'd prefer another meeting to talk about it. We can go forth with this plan, but make the decision after we talk with our engineer and with Ted.
Well,
Would
does,
it be too late to talk about it?
Before the council meeting?
Council meeting?
Yeah.
No.
Or at 4 o'clock or something, the council meeting day or something where it could stop in early.
We could do that.
I'm good for an earlier
time?
meeting if we
Why
need
don't you do
to.
it at 6?
why don't we do it like the week before?
What time, Shar?
Tuesday, the 3rd of December,
Yeah, I'm not here. I can call in.
how about, you're here, gone the whole week?
I'm child sitting. Grandchild sitting.
Do it earlier in the day on the 9th,
That'd be,
so that we have time to put the resolution
that'd be
Yeah,
okay.
together,
Yeah.
if there's changes.
Could people do early in the morning, like
Sure.
9 a.m. or,
I
You're
will
not
not,
available at all?
I'm not available on the 9th.
okay.
So you won't be at the council meeting either?
Well, yeah, I will be, but I'm going to miss my wife's Christmas party,
Oh, that's
which I'm
not
not
good.
very,
That's not good.
but
Sorry.
whatever.
That's not good at all.
well, if somebody's gonna, you can't, I would say the 9th AM,
8 a.m.?
or 9 AM on the 9th.
9?
If you're not here, you're not here, I guess, we'll.
Or you
can be
meet
here.
next week when I'm not here, because I'm actually pretty okay with the Bolton Inc. Oh, okay, all right. Or the week after. I mean,
You know, you could have a meeting after the 9th, too,
okay with that.
if that works for everybody.
That's fine.
When does that resolution have to be done?
Sooner is better. We need
You don't have a deadline?
February, well, the resolution I'd like to get as soon as possible so we can engage our legislators. Because we have to have our plan put together.
So if we did it tonight, that would be
Yeah.
Or do you want to do Tuesday, the 10th? Is that better?
We're all meeting December 6th. You want to do it, just come in here 30 minutes earlier and
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
and do it then?
Yeah, I'm out of town the 6th, but that's okay.
If you're
'Cause I'm pretty
comfortable with it?
happy with the Bolton Mink report. I
Okay.
mean, I don't mind some more extra engineer involvement, but I won't be able to add value to that discussion.
Yeah. You available
I'm good, yeah.
6th and
December 6th at 10,
10 a.m.?
Sure.
after your planning and zoning meeting?
Oh, afterwards.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, that gives you a stop dead time.
Oh, I get my phone.
Do you have that report? Did you ever get a copy of it? From Bolton and Mink?
Yeah, I have it at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't bring it with me, but I have it at home. That's the one that sent me kind of
So
my first
do we have a
meeting.
motion for that meeting?
I so move.
Thank you,
Second.
thank you.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
I have nothing further unless you have questions for me.
Are we gonna go back to the budget?
Yeah, what would you like to talk about in the budget?
Levy percentage.
Okay. Do you still want 9, or do you want something different?
I'm happy with the way it is.
Leave it at 9?
I'm good with 9.
Okay, do we have a motion? You want a motion for that?
Yep.
Motion?
I'll make a motion for 9.
Second it.
Got a motion and a second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Were there any names?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing else.
Yeah, I just want to talk about that Bolton, I mean, we'll talk about that. We can talk about that one-on-one and,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, do we have a motion?
So move, adjourn.
We got a motion and a second to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye. Aaron?
Yeah.
Mike?